Hi, and welcome to the show. Subscribe at kevinmd.com/podcast. Today, we welcome back Dennis Hursh, health law attorney. Today's Kevin MD article is Why Hospitals Are Quietly Capping Top Doctors' Pay. Dennis, welcome back to the show.
Oh, thanks. It's great to be here.
All right, what's your latest article about?
Well, it's I've been seeing it for a while, but I'm seeing more and more of it where in a physician employment agreement there'll be a provision, and sometimes it's under no circumstances will your compensation exceed. And I've seen as low as the 75th percentile of benchmarks for total compensation. You see more 90th percentile, but you actually see some that say the 75th percentile. And I've pushed back on that and said, wait a minute, this guy's a really productive physician. Why are you penalizing him? And I've been told, oh, it's fraud and abuse. If a regulator saw that he or she was making more than 90%, they'd think we were paying for referrals. And that's kind of an absurd position. I mean, if you take that position, that means that either if you're at the 90th percentile, it means that presumably 10% of all the physicians in your specialty must be breaking the law. It must be a fraud and abuse issue. And it's even more absurd at the 75th percentile. You know, there are 25% of every physician in America must be breaking the law. So it's kind of a crazy position in my mind. Sometimes they'll kind of ease it up a little bit and they'll say, well, we may review compensation if it would exceed. But I want to emphasize, I've seen contracts that just flat say, we don't pay more than that. So if you're the most productive physician in your specialty in the country, you know, on behalf of the CEO, I really want to thank you because you're going to be really putting a lot on my CEO bonus. And of course, nothing for you. So I think it's kind of, if you want to incent somebody to work, then don't cap their compensation at some random percentage.
Now, how common is that provision, are you finding?
I'm finding it more and more common. It used a couple years ago, I'd see it once in a while. Now I'm seeing it in a large majority of physician employment agreements. And as I said, it can really, it's almost like we don't want productive physicians working here, you know.
Oh, they only want productive to a point, but if it passes
That's
that
right.
that high benchmark, then we're
Yeah.
just going to cap it.
Yeah, well, which is, I mean, great for me as a CEO, you know, bring in all that money. That's great. You're frozen, but my bonus isn't. So,
So what's preventing physicians from working up until that artificial cap and then simply just not doing anything after that?
well, a couple of things. One, if the patients are there, you're not going to say, hey, it's 4 o'clock, you know, I've got a full schedule, but my productivity's up. So good luck, guys. You know, I'm heading out the door and playing golf. I mean, physicians will always keep treating patients. You know, if patients present, you're going to keep treating them. And another thing I see is a lot of institutions are not very good at reporting your productivity. So even if you were inclined to do that, and I don't think there's too many physicians that are, but even if you were inclined to do that, you frequently don't know that you're bumping up into the percentiles. Because even when they tell you, unless you have access to the benchmarks, you know, they'll tell you you've produced 9,500 WRVUs. Well, unless you know what the benchmarks are, you have no idea if you're bumping up into the cap. So it works, as I said, it works great for them. Physicians will always treat patients as long as they keep presenting. You'll keep killing yourself to treat them, and just your compensation is frozen, you know, maybe quite some time ago.
Well, maybe instead of asking it like that, but another way. So, as a primary care physician, if there's an artificial cap, 75th percentile, 90th percentile, maybe instead of seeing 20 patients a day, you could adjust your schedule and see maybe only 15 or 16. So you're better aligned with that cap.
You could try. A lot of hospitals are not going to allow that. And even private practices tend to say, no, in this practice, we see X patients a day. So a lot of times, and again, they'll do it always works with physicians where you're doing it for the patients. We're going to be pushing off patients and you don't want your patients suffering. And no, you don't. You just want to be paid appropriately. So, yeah, I mean, in theory, I think that would work. In practice, a lot of times, I don't see it working too well.
Are there, in fact, cases where physicians get in trouble for working past the 90th percentile?
No, I think the issue would be if you're not very productive, but you're being paid at the 95th percentile of compensation, there's a reasonable assumption that maybe that's because we're paying you for referrals, which of course is unlawful. But even that isn't really isn't really the case. I mean, if you're at the 95th percentile of productivity, you should be getting paid more than the 90th percentile. And more importantly, there's areas in this country that physicians are just not really excited about going to, and they have to pay the physicians very well to get them there. So you may not be all that busy, but you don't want to go to that rural backwater. You want to be in Manhattan, you want to be in San Diego.
Mhm.
You don't want to go in this rural little backwater hospital, but the only reason you'll do it is if they pay you very well. So if that's the case, yeah, your pay may be very high and maybe you're not productive. But again, it's not a fraud and abuse issue.
So if physicians encounter this artificial cap, but the reporting isn't really robust enough, so they don't know where they even stand, what can they do, right? So I think that can they ask for more accurate, transparent reporting?
Yeah, I think you have to ask for better reporting, and more importantly, there you got to look at those provisions. Like I said, there shouldn't be a flat cap. No matter what, you're not going over this. I do see some that say the one I most commonly see is we may review your compensation if you would exceed 90%. Well, first of all, you should be required to review the compensation. And then the ones that do say that tend to have the hospital do it. And I've actually pushed back one time. I talked to a hospital and said, why are you experts on physician compensation? I was actually told we have many CPAs and certified coders on staff. So we're very good at, yeah, so you're good at tax returns and you're good at coding, and therefore we're going to let you do physician compensation. Even agreeing that those people were qualified, which I don't, they're working for the hospital. I mean, can you imagine going in and saying, how about if it looks like my pay is going to exceed the 90th percentile? How about if I review it and let you know if I think that's okay? I mean, you'd be laughed right out of the room, and rightfully so. One side to the transaction shouldn't be deciding if the pay is accurate.
Now, are you successful in getting institutions to either remove the cap or negotiating that cap up?
Not usually negotiating the cap up. Usually, what I focus on is the ability to have it reviewed and have it reviewed by compensation experts if it looks like it's going to exceed the cap.
Now, when you said that physicians should review that contract by compensation experts, is that attorneys like yourself? Do they have to get a third party?
Yeah, you should get a third party, I think. If you're at that high, I mean, I have access to the MGMA benchmarks, but you want somebody who spends their life doing physician compensation looking at this. Because I mean, I don't want to downgrade. There is a risk. There is a fraud and abuse risk. If somebody comes in and says you're paying this physician too much, you must be paying for referrals. So you do want an expert. But yeah, it is a third party. Usually, of course, I feel the hospital should pay for the third party, not the physician. But
And in general, what kind of institutions are you seeing these caps being present? Are private practice, academic, hospital owned? Are there any specific types of practices that are more prone to
hospital
have this
owned,
provision?
hospital owned are more in academic. A lot of times you don't see a very robust productivity incentive. So even if you're working very, very hard, you're not likely to exceed these percentiles. So it's mostly the hospital owned practices that I see it.
So if you were to speculate on a reason why these caps are there and you don't think it's fraud or abuse, what would you say is the real reason that they're implementing these caps?
Well, I think maybe they legitimately are doing it for fraud and abuse. I mean, if you really want to be safe, if we paid all our physicians minimum wage, I can pretty much guarantee you that the OIG is never going to look at you. They're going to be perfectly satisfied with this. So you're always safe underpaying physicians. That's always the conservative, safe approach. The thing is, then don't expect them to be very productive. And that's where it's bad, where you put in a productivity bonus, but then cap it and say, we'll pay you for being productive, but only so far.
Productive, but not too productive.
Exactly, exactly. But hopefully you'll be extremely productive because again, my CEO really loves those bonuses.
So in your article, you also talk about some of the macro effects of these caps. So talk about some of the insidious long-term effects.
Well, I think the biggest thing is every year the the employers are surveyed by MGMA and Sullivan Cotter and the other big surveys. So if you're unfortunately working at one of those hospitals, you're the most productive physician in the country in your specialty, and you're working at a hospital to capture pay at the 75th percentile, you get those statistics that say this is a WRVU production and this is a salary. Well, all that's going to get blended in next year, and next year it's going to lower the overall compensation for everybody in the specialty, and especially at the high percentiles. So it really is not just you that's getting hurt by this. It literally is all the physicians in your specialty next year are going to pay.
So, how about a physician who already has a contract and just discovers this language? Is there anything that they can do?
Well, again, if you're not super productive and you're not bouncing into the cap, it's probably not a big deal. But yeah, I think you have to go in and renegotiate. And bear in mind, if that describes you, you are extremely productive. And we're talking about somebody that's in, the top 10% of productivity in the country. So they should very much be listening to you and saying, hey, we got to change this. I don't mind working hard. I am working hard. I'm demonstrating that I'm working hard, but I need to be appropriately compensated.
It doesn't seem to be good long-term strategy for hospitals to antagonize their most productive clinicians.
It isn't, but a lot of a lot of things hospitals do don't seem to make any sense. And you're right. The people that this impacts the most are your most productive physicians. If you're in the, bottom 10% of productivity, I mean, capping it at the 75th percentile is no big deal.
We're talking to Dennis Hursh, health law attorney. Today's Kevin MD article is Why Hospitals Are Quietly Capping Top Doctors' Pay. Dennis, as always, let's end with some take-home messages that you want to leave with the Kevin MD audience.
Yeah, look at your contract. Make sure that you know if there is a cap on compensation. If you're not getting reports on your productivity, you should start getting reports. And if you are very productive, then you really need to go in and renegotiate that and make sure that you're being appropriately paid for your productivity.
Dennis, as always, thank you so much for sharing your insight and perspective. And thanks again for coming back on the show.
Oh, it's always a pleasure. Thanks.